campus in Grantham, England. And since 1999, he's been a member of the Department of History at the University of Evansville. He teaches courses in European history and the two world wars and lectures frequently on these topics. He's also a terrific man and a great colleague, and I feel so fortunate to get to work with him. He's amazing. He's very popular. As you can imagine, he's one of the most sought-after teachers on our campus. Our students adore him, and I know that you're going to understand why after you have some time with him tonight. So, Dr. MacLeod?
Thank you. Well, thank you, Cherie, for that ridiculous introduction. My principal motivation for writing this book was to ensure that the story of what happened in Evansville during World War II was passed on. I think there's a risk that as the people who were involved and even the children of the people who were involved pass away, the story can get lost. And so I thought it was very important to tell the story and to pass it on to the next generation. So your job tonight is to sort of go home and do that. My other motivation in writing this book was to solve all your Christmas present problems. If you haven't already bought a copy of the book, they'll be available afterwards, and I'll be very happy to write all over them in a Sharpie. So before, I'm trying to find a mouse here it is. Every time I talk about this, I want to make sure that I thank the people, and I'm not going to read all of this, but I want you to read it as I'm talking. The job of a historian, the exercise of being a historian, is one where, as I hope all of our students here know, it is entirely based upon the work of those who went before. And in the case of Evansville and World War II, what makes it so interesting is that many of these people are not professional historians. Many of these people don't work in universities. These are people who have other jobs, who have day jobs, but who dedicated their life, in some cases, Harold Morgan certainly springs to mind, to telling the story of Evansville in World War II. And everything that I did in this book could only have been done with them. The second group of people there is the people who are archivists. Again, a historian can't do anything unless there's records to use. And in Evansville, we're really, really fortunate to have a number of amazing collections and archives, which are only amazing because of the amazing archivists who make it possible. So some of the people on that slide are here tonight. I'm really glad that you're here. I won't embarrass you by calling you out, but I really want to acknowledge you. And Cherie, I won't embarrass you by saying as nice things about you as you said about me, but Cherie not only runs our Office of Veteran Affairs as well as her other jobs, but she organized a really beautiful Veterans Day celebration on campus today at lunchtime and did everything to organize this event tonight, including the publicity that got all of you here. So thank you, Cherie, so much for doing that. I also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the veterans. This is Veterans Day, and I know that not all the veterans in here are able to stand, but maybe if the veterans could at least raise their hands, and we could acknowledge the veterans who are here tonight. Clap yourselves when your hands in the air, right? And for personal reasons, I want to acknowledge these two young men. They're both 20 years old in this picture. My wife Jessica's granddad, Donald Shaw, one of the young men of the U.S. Army who arrived in Normandy in 1944 and fought all the way through to 1945, getting wounded along the way. And my dad, Lachlan MacLeod, who's also 20, was a member of the British Merchant Navy, repeatedly sailed the ferociously dangerous waters of the North Atlantic to transport the men and materials on which the Allies depended. To them and millions like them, we owe our freedom. Most of all, I want to thank this band of villains, my own children who are here, who put up with a lot of conversation about World War II over the past 18 months as this book took shape, and my wife Jessica, who is over there somewhere, I think. She's wrangling one of these children, who not only put up with all of that, but who read chunks of the book and certainly improved it. And to all four of you, this book is dedicated with my deepest love. What I'm going to do tonight is, I don't have a copy of the book up here with me, but it is a reading. My eyesight is terrible. If I don't have 15-point font in front of me, you ain't getting anything at all. So what I'm doing is reading basically a chunk of the introduction and a chunk of the conclusion of this book. And if you want to know what happens in between, you got to go by. This is the 11th of November, as you know, and the story begins on another November 11th. November 11th, 1928. When the city of Evansville's first ever municipal statue was dedicated in this dramatic location at Sunset Park on the Ohio River. The statue was the spirit of the American doughboy, and it was to be the city's memorial to the First World War. So 10 years after the end of the First World War, we finally got around to putting up a memorial to the end of the war. Evansville's always taken a long time to get things built. And it was dedicated by a president of this institution, President Earl Harper. And in the dedication, the president of Evansville College said to the audience, "You must do away with this madman, which is the institution called war." And he expressed the fervent hope that not in 100 years shall the heroism of youth again be called upon the battlefield. Okay, we're not going to do that again for 100 years. Can you all hear me at the back? Yeah. And this is a Carl K. Connect cartoon from the following year, kind of expressing the same hope. The old veterans sitting in a cemetery, and this old gentleman is saying to the young Evansville College man here, "Well, Sonny, we all hope that you and yours and all others to come won't have to become veterans as we did." These were very hopeful and stirring words, but within less than a decade, the opening exchanges of a second global conflict were beginning to play out half a world away in Asia. Within 11 years, the madman called war would be unleashed again with almost unthinkable results. Within 13 years, the United States would be at war once again in a conflict that would ultimately cost 405,000 American lives. And within 13 years, the city of Evansville would once again be called upon to send its sons to fight and die in faraway places, and to make countless vital contributions to the war effort, most notably in manufacturing. And already tonight I've met veterans from Evansville and people whose parents worked in that industry. And in the process, the city would in many ways be transformed, although Wrights Hill is still pretty much the same. Well, traditionally, the histories of wars have focused on strategy and tactics and battles. The reality of modern warfare in the middle of the 20th century was that the single most important element was not any of these, but rather materials. The Pulitzer Prize-winning historian David M. Kennedy has spoken of the inexorable logic of modern warfare when machines and the speed and volume of their manufacture mattered at least as much as men and the swiftness and precision of their maneuver in determining the battle's outcome. I think he's right, and if he's right, then Evansville certainly played a vital role in ensuring that this war, the war over the production of materials, was won by the Allies. And by winning this war, the Allies ensured their eventual victory in the wider war, which, as an aside, I would say is the most important war in human history. So Evansville did something that was pretty important. What Evansville did during World War II was stunning. I've got this little map here, and I'm going to be talking a lot in the town over the next month, and I'll talk about different aspects of all of it, but I'll keep using this map because I think it just reminds you of the amount of stuff, but also the concentration. It's kind of the old center of Evansville. Republic Aviation, which I'll talk about in a minute, was up by the airport, and the shipyard was down by the river, St. Joe Avenue, where Mead Johnson is today. But much of the production was in this kind of old central part of Evansville here, and the housing projects that I'll talk about were kind of scattered around there too. What Evansville did during World War II was stunning. Before December 1941, Evansville was a relatively sleepy Ohio River city, badly affected by the Great Depression, and with only a handful of companies working on military contracts. The economic situation was exacerbated throughout 1941 as U.S. industry switched to a war footing and civilian production declined. The city faced a major jobs crisis as employment declined in all its major plants. A lot of people forget that although the war started for the United States on December 7th, 1941, America had been gearing up for war for months and months before that. And all the places that didn't have war industry were getting squeezed. So, as I said on WNIN this morning, Evansville could have been a ghost town. And instead of becoming a ghost town, it became a boom town. And yet, as I'll continue here, almost incredibly, the city was transformed within a few months into a uniquely productive center of manufacturing for the war effort. Tens of thousands of new workers flooded into Evansville, and two massive new manufacturing centers quickly emerged in the form of the Evansville Shipyard, which was announced in February 1942, and Republic Aviation, which was going to build Thunderbolt, P-47 Thunderbolts, which was announced March 1942. The shipyard was to make Navy vessels called landing ship tanks, or LSTs, and by the end of the war had launched 167 of these unglamorous but absolutely essential transport ships. So this is just a Google map of the site today. There's the Lloyd, there's St. Joe, this is Wrights High School, and this entire area, it's more than 45 acres, was where the shipyard was placed. The LST was designed to sail right up, and that's the scene today. So you would really, other than one tiny marker, there's nothing to tell you that that was there, what was there one day. The LST was designed to sail right up onto the beach and then open the bow doors and disembark her cargo of tanks and other vehicles directly onto the beach. Kind of brilliant idea. They were, according to the British naval historian Nick Hewitt, probably the single most important type of ship used in assault landings anywhere in the Second World War. And they were a massively important piece of technology, he said. I'll come back to this picture in a second. No less an authority than British Prime Minister Winston Churchill remarked that, quote, "The destinies of two great empires," he meant the British and the American, "seem to be tied up in some goddamn things called LSTs." While on another occasion he said, "The letters LST are burned upon the minds of all who dealt with military affairs in this period." So what I did here is just again, for all of us who live here, this is obviously a shot looking west from about probably where the Mead Johnson terminal, that old white thing that kind of sticks out into the river is. And as you're looking west there, you can see Wrights High School on the hill. The old Wrights Bowl is here. The Sigaco terminal, which is still there, is here. And then this is the rest of the shipyard right here. And effectively, there were two what were called building ways. Ships were built on either side of the yard, and then when they were completed, they were pushed into the middle for completion, and then moved down to the launching ways down here. and then they slid sideways. They slid sideways slowly down into the river. And in fact, when the first one was launched, it was the Evansville College Choir that was singing the national anthem, and then Old Man River as the ship slid down. Republic Aviation was the second big new plant, and that was to manufacture 6,670 of one of the war's most important aircraft, the P-47 Thunderbolt. This is the Sunday Courier and Press announcing that it's coming. I really like this front page because it's got that story on it. It's got this awesome story here about the new exploration of what would become Angel Mounds, and one of the great artifacts from Angel Mounds here. There's a wonderful cartoon by Carl K. Knecht. And then right here at the top of the front page is a big story about the red light district. So if you think Evansville's a kind of sleazy place now, you should have seen it then. So the Thunderbolt, the P-47 Thunderbolt, played a vital role as an escort fighter and as a fighter bomber. And like the LST, was to have enormous importance both in Europe and the Pacific. The P-47 was one of the most versatile, rugged, and effective military aircraft of World War II. One writer said, by the end of the war, all Allied squadrons equipped with the P-47 could congratulate themselves on a job well done. In all theaters, the crippling losses in personnel and material inflicted on the Axis by Thunderbolt attack had reached staggering proportions. Another commentator in the P-47 said, there's little question that the Thunderbolt distinguished itself as a potent tactical air weapon in Western Europe that was reliable and easy to fly. It was also tenacious, and the P-47's highest praise has always come from the men who flew her. She brought them back, unquote. And in fact, those of you who were at the lunchtime Veterans Day ceremony, one of the guys from Evansville College who died was a P-47 Thunderbolt pilot, and his Thunderbolt was shot to pieces in Europe, and he was still able to land it and walk away from it. He became a prisoner, survived the war, came home and was an instructor and was killed in an accident in October of 1945. But P-47s could basically be blown to pieces, and they were still able to land them. And some of you have heard me say this 100 times, but the joke was always that if you wanted to get a good-looking woman, you should fly a Mustang. But if you wanted to come home to her, you should fly a Thunderbolt. So the people of Evansville did great things, and that's the site. This is basically Highway 41 right here. This is the current site of the airport, and this is what older folks will think of as whirlpool. Folks who are new to town, it's just that big blue thing up by the airport, which is now, I think, a site for roofing materials or something like that. But during World War II, it was a really, really important place. I had a drive around there actually on Friday, took some pictures of it, and much of it, when you actually get in and poke around, a lot of it looks like it's a 1942 building. I mean, it really is the same place. No other city in the United States produced both LSTs and P-47s. And had Evansville done nothing else, that alone would have made its contribution to the war effort unique. But there was, of course, much more to Evansville's unique contribution than transport ships and fighter planes. As Professor Darrell Bigham has observed, as significant as Evansville Shipyard and Republic were, the two new places, most war workers were employed in factories that had existed before early 1942. Vanderbilt County firms would by March 1944 receive nearly $600 million in defense contracts, and 48 Evansville businesses did some sort of war work. Of all these businesses, it's possible that none was more important than the Chrysler plant, which in one of the miracles of American production was in less than 5 months transformed from a factory producing Plymouth automobiles into the Evansville Ordnance plant. And some of you may know where all these places are, but some of you may not. So this is the old Chrysler plant right here. on Maxwell Avenue. So that was what became Evansville Ordnance, along with the Sunbeam plant, which was about here, kind of over by Bossy Field. They also had this huge bullet loading plant on Kentucky and Diamond. And then when they were refitting Sherman tanks, they tested the tanks on this track, which runs around it, and which to my great glee I discovered is still there. You can drive around with, with your arm sticking out of the car and pretend it's a tank, which my son has made me promise to do. So this is like a Raven tire warehouse right here, and there's a donut bank, I think, right about here. So you'll be able to find it, and you can zoom around going rum rum. What they did there is just staggering. I mean, I could have filled that book just with ridiculous statistics. But the Evansville Ordnance plant, 3.5 billion 45 caliber cartridges. You can read the stuff there. They produced 96% of all the 45 caliber ammunition manufactured in the United States during World War II, right here in Evansville. And what I don't say in this part of the book is what I think is also really remarkable is that almost all of these plants, they of course had to retool and retrain to do all of that, but they retooled and retrained repeatedly through the war. Places like Servelle would have a huge contract, they would retool, they would retrain their guys, and then a year later they would retool and retrain again. It's pretty staggering how flexible both business and labor was during World War II. So in addition, the Servelle Corporation manufactured wing panels, for example. Sunbeam Electric shifted the production of 45 caliber shell casings from brass to steel. Sounds easy, right? Just make it of a different kind of metal. Brass and steel are totally different types of metal. And instead of having bullets made out of brass, you now have to make them out of steel. It's really difficult. And in fact, we're in the Schraeder Family School of Business. It was the current John Schraeder's grandfather was in charge of Sunbeam at the time. And there's funny quotes in the book from him where he sort of says, well, it was a really difficult job, but we just had to do it. It's kind of the sense of what you have. Many other plants, large and small, switched over from what they were doing and manufactured a huge array of products for the war effort, leading one company president, T.J. Morton Jr. of Hoosier Light and Stamping, to refer to the Evansville war plant workers as the army left at home. What's really neat about this portrait is anybody who's in Olmsted is one of the paintings hanging outside the president's office got shifted to be in an exhibit down in the museum, and it got replaced with this portrait here, which in tiny little letters says it's T.J. Morton. And I'm probably the only one in the world that was excited about it. You get a color picture of T.J. Morton from my PowerPoint. It was indeed an army. Thousands of Americans flooded into Evansville from all over the country. And the city's manufacturing workforce more than tripled from 18,000 to 60,000. Migration on this scale put enormous strains on the existing housing stock, and it was clear from the very start that extraordinary steps would have to be taken to provide living accommodation for all of the new workers and their families. Building projects began immediately, with millions of dollars spent on privately constructed housing, and the federal government was also heavily involved. By the end of the war, Evansville had constructed no less than 6 federal housing projects, one of which was for African Americans. So Gatewood Gardens was one, Diamond Villa was one, Fulton Square was one, and what was emphasized with all of these was that they were temporary, that were going to be here for 2 or 3 years, and then they were going to be gone. And I took these photos of Diamond Villa and Fulton Square last week. So they are still here. When the government says temporary, it doesn't always mean temporary. Activities like this were happening all over the United States, and this is what I think makes Evansville such an interesting case study. The story of Evansville in World War II isn't just the story of a unique contribution to the war effort, but it's also in many ways a fascinating reflection of the wider American experience during the war. Women moved into the workforce in every part of the country, And the challenges and opportunities that are seen in Evansville reflect this wider phenomenon. And when I was talking about this the other day, one of our colleagues here at U of E, Mike Smith, told me that his grandmother met his grandfather while they were both welders at the shipyard, and she was his supervisor. And Mike then said with a twinkle in his eye, and that relationship continued the same way. So the Evansville experience reflects the wider American experience. This is the shipyard's first woman welder, Evelyn Cox, who famously said in a Courier interview, "My job isn't nearly as tiring as doing a day's ironing," which is one of I think my favorite quote in the book. So that the reflection of the wider American situation might also be said of the tensions surrounding race relations, as African Americans not only moved into parts of the country where they had not lived in large numbers, but also moved into sectors of the workforce that had previously excluded them. One of the exceptions actually is the shipyard, where black workers pretty much did the things that black workers were expected to do, be janitors and be waiters. But in many of the other parts of Evansville industry, black workers were put into skilled positions where they wouldn't have been before. And there's a ton of conflict in the city about that, and even in some cases strikes. And it's oftentimes when black workers are perceived as usurping white workers' positions, or if black male workers are beside white female workers. That was enough to get Evansville's citizens out on strike. And that sort of stuff was happening all over the country. Evansville's struggles with the issue of prostitution in this period were also very much a reflection of what happened across the country. The military had to deal with what this author euphemistically calls the recreational activities of millions of servicemen in thousands of locations, and it was a monumental task. Some of the federal government documents that I looked at, they estimated that up to 10,000 servicemen would come into Evansville on a weekend, and the Evansville Vice Squad, 2 men. Yes, who won that? So another important way in which Evansville's experience reflects wider national trends is in the organization of production. The production effort was neither an action of the federal government nor of private enterprise, but was instead a complex and highly flexible mix of the two. In some ways it was the genius of the United States, the way it was done. And this is a really early, this is 2 days after Pearl Harbor, Carl K. Kinect's cartoon. The caption is "Now Then, All Together," and he has his famous little figure here, Joe Public, with the president and Uncle Sam, and they're forging a piece of steel that's blue, white, and red, and Joe Public is rolling up his sleeves. And it's like many Kinect cartoons, it's this very prescient, very prophetic, very profound, and very accurate reflection of what really happened. The Evansville shipyard operated under the auspices of the Department of the Navy. It had senior Navy personnel overseeing it, but it was operated by a private company, the Missouri Valley Bridge and Iron Company. And the factory building P-47s was subject to the approval of the War Department, but was operated by a private corporation, Republic Aviation. And all the raw materials and even some completed parts for ships and airplanes were supplied by other local companies, as well as others further away. So it's an amazingly complicated story, and this image of these federal officials in Washington poring over spreadsheets and charts, trying to make sure that all the right stuff gets to the right places at the right time. How it's done is kind of boggling to the mind. The final way in which the Evansville experience was a reflection of the American experience was that while the Second World War has recently been called the most destructive event in recorded human history, the city itself did not directly experience the physical impact of war, like almost all of the United States. It did, however, experience casualties. On November 11th, 1945, the Evansville Courier reported that the total number of local men who'd been killed was 459. And it is striking, really striking, when examining the local newspapers during the war, that almost, in fact, it's almost literally every day there's a litany of reports about men who are killed, wounded, or missing, or taken prisoner. The first Evansville casualty of the war was killed at Pearl Harbor. So, the first minute of the war, the first Evansville casualty died. And news of death and battle was being received in Evansville long after the war was over. I'm so happy that Sherry and I were able to have this event in here tonight, because when we have our reception afterwards, we're going to have the reception right beside the Evansville College War Memorial. 33 men from Evansville College died in the war. And this is a memorial that, like many memorials, most people walk past it without even seeing it. And you could probably quiz faculty and staff and students at U of E, and there's probably plenty of us wouldn't be able to say where this was located, but we can have a look at it tonight. But a couple of these guys, their deaths were not confirmed until after the war was over, and many of these guys, maybe I should wave my hands about a little bit. I'm almost done. Somebody's turning the lights off. One of the things that really struck me, and I write about a little bit in my chapter on the dead in the book, is that it took so long to get these bodies home. Obviously thousands of Americans are buried abroad, but those families that wanted to bring the dead home could do so, and it was a process that took years and years. And you read about these guys coming home in the Evansville Courier for years after the end of the war. And then just as I was finishing my research, I discovered that one of these guys, actually Arthur Parkhurst up here, he was missing in action in the Philippines, and his name is on the panel of the missing in Manila Military Cemetery. And just in about 2010, some farmer in the Philippines found the plane, and dog tags and forensics, they were able to ID Arthur, and he was brought home, and he was buried in Louisville in 2010, and his brother was still alive and was able to say how wonderful it was to get his little brother back home. So I thought that really illustrated perfectly the long tale of the war. It finished in May, June, July, August, September of 1945 in various places, but in some ways it's never really finished. This is my last paragraph. While there are 2 paragraphs, I'm sorry. While there are some markers and memorials, I feel strongly that far too much of the city's World War II heritage has been lost, or is almost invisible to the people of Evansville. A modest marker of what was once Republic Aviation, and a small monument in the parking lot that was once the Evansville shipyard barely do justice to the grandeur of the achievements that they seek to record. Other than a few skeletal pieces of steel and wood and one decrepit crane, there's nothing physically left of the shipyard at all. Although this little spot here, it was all I could do to keep my kids from walking out on it to get a better view of the river. Grand old names from the city's wartime, there they are. Grand old names from the city's wartime production miracles, Sunbeam, Serval, Chrysler, Briggs, Hoosier Cardinal, and many others are long gone from the city or remain in unrecognizable forms. Fragments of the plants remain, but there's no sign of their wartime role, and their massive contributions to the war effort go unmarked. With a few exceptions, the housing projects that sprang up in the city are long demolished. The 2 USO buildings, as well as the hotels, bars, cafes, and clubs where thousands of young men and women found entertainment, are gone. There are now no brothels in Evansville. Most importantly, the men and women who did it all, the labor, business, and political leaders who brought the contracts here, the people who served in uniform, the workers who labored around the clock to produce the goods that won the most important war in human history, they're almost all gone too. Barely a day goes by without the obituary pages of the Evansville Courier Press recording the passing away of one or more of them. Before too long, that generation will have passed and their stories will die with them. It would certainly be great to see in the city an appropriately significant physical memorial to the people of Evansville, whose labors and sacrifice played such a vital role in winning the Second World War. It is long overdue, but it would be better late than never. But in one very important way, it could be argued that that memorial exists already. For without the efforts of these people and millions of others like them, the workers and the managers, as well as the soldiers and sailors and Marines and airmen, World War II would have been lost. Tyranny would have triumphed over freedom, and a new dark ages would have begun. If one is looking for the most appropriate memorial to the efforts of the people of Evansville during World War II, perhaps one need only look back at the past 70 years of the history of the free world. Thank you.